Today, we're talking about the formula to beat the Las Vegas Raiders. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jaden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we are talking about a couple more keys for the Washington Commanders heading into this game against the Las Vegas Raiders. And so on the offensive side of the ball, I think it's going to be all about the passing game and just really getting the ball down the field. And then defensively for the Commanders, they must get turnovers in this game. And so let's start with the offensive side of the ball and just really how this team can unlock the passing game this week. And so, we all know that Marcus Mariota is going to be starting here. And like I said in yesterday's video, actually, we got a chance to see a stat out of the commanders.com article that Marcus Mariota can definitely get the ball down the field. This is a guy that came in last season. He got the 4 touchdowns. He had a 77.3% completion rate and also 364 yards. And so Marcus Mariota can definitely get the ball down the field. The question is, are we going to open up the offense enough? Because I think that when you look at just what the Raiders have done over the first 2 weeks of the season, I think that there is a real chance that the Commanders can really get on rhythm against the Raiders and really get some chunk plays, because just going into week number 2 here for the Raiders in that last game that they played against the Chargers, 8.1 per pass against the Chargers. In week number 1, just 4.9 against the New England Patriots, but still they gave up some chunk plays there, and they had a receiver that went over 100 yards. And so I think that the Commanders first and foremost can take advantage really over the middle of the field. So, the first player that comes to mind that I think is in line for a huge game is going to be Zach Ertz. I think that Zach Ertz, because he's very crafty and just his ability to kind of sit into zones and also to still beat man coverage as well, I think that he's in line for a huge game. And I think that Marcus Mariota really will settle in with Zach Ertz initially to kind of get things going and hopefully loosen up the Raiders, because I do think that, look, you start with the running game, you also start with the intermediate passes and things like that, and just kind of get the Raiders to kind of come up, and then that's when you hit them over the top. And so I think that Zach Ertz is definitely in line for a big game. And then next, I think that Deebo Samuel, he's in line for a big game as well, because look, between him and Zach Ertz, these are the two players that have been able to get into the end zone for the Commanders. And so we saw in week 1 with Deebo Samuel that he definitely is going to run a lot of different routes. He's not just going to run, a whole bunch of screens. He's not just going to run over the middle of the field and things like that. Like the Washington Commanders have shown that they will utilize Deebo Samuel in a lot of different ways. And so I love that you're getting that type of versatility, because once this offense starts to click and things start to loosen up, it's just going to make this team that much harder to stop. But I do think that Deebo Samuel, look, I think the entire route tree is going to be open, but I think he's probably going to be the guy that is the first player that really makes some deep plays down the field for us in this game. And then next, as far as my X factor in the offense here, I think that this is the game for Terry McLaurin. It's really been a slow start for him throughout the first 2 weeks of the season, but I do think that the coverage from the Raiders will allow you to get into these situations where, he can win in these contested catch situations. And also too, I think that he can win, perhaps on some of these double moves and post moves and things like that. It's just a matter of protecting Marcus Mariota enough so he can get the ball down the field. And so I just think that he's my X factor coming into this game. I think that if Terry McLaurin can really get started, early, it could be big for the Commanders. And so we talked about this in yesterday's video, I believe, where you saw that there were multiple players that had, 5-6 catches or whatnot. And so, they will let you get into a rhythm. And so talking about the Raiders defense in the secondary there, it's just a matter of once you're in rhythm, it's just really taking advantage of just when they start to come up, just when they're loose in their zones and things like that. And so this is my X factor going into this. And then as far as pass catchers that I think could really just have their welcome to the party moment, it could definitely be a game for Jalen Lane and then also to Luke McCaffrey. I think that this is the game, where they step up because, you do not have Noah Brown out there. John Bates, we know he's a great blocker, but he's not out there. And so I just think that now, the Washington Commanders, they might need somebody along with Zach Ertz to kind of open things up early. This is where you can utilize Jalen Lane, especially in the screen game. Perhaps you can use him for that intermediate stuff over the middle. Same with Luke McCaffrey as well. And so I think that there is a chance that they could get started very early, and that could help just kind of loosen things up for the Commanders. And so that's key number one here with the Commanders as we get ready to head into this game tomorrow. And so the next actual thing that I think the Commanders need to do is just defensively getting turnovers. And so, I think that when you look at just the offense for the Raiders over the last 2 weeks, they've been extremely loose with the football in the air because they had 3 INTs in week 2 against the Chargers. And then in week 1, they had an INT there. And so we know that Geno Smith is definitely capable of getting the football down the field. I think he had 362 yards in week 1. Just wasn't a good week in week number 2. But, man, he was fearless as far as putting the ball out there. And so, look, I think that just with this offense, they're like, look, we're going to take our shots here, regardless if a defender is there. We just kind of want to give our guy a chance. And so even if that leads to, putting the ball in danger, this is where the Commanders are just going to have to capitalize on that. And so I think it's going to be a challenge for the Commanders because they just haven't got a turnover in the first 2 weeks. One of those was called back in week number 1. And so I do think that this is probably the game where it's most likely to happen. And so I would be disappointed if we don't see the Commanders come up with a turnover, especially with the way that they're playing up front, because I do think that the Commanders will be able to generate some pressure on Geno Smith without necessarily having to call a blitz, which is huge, for Joe Wood Jr. and this defense. And so now it's just the secondary that has looked so good in training camp, in practice. Can it convert here and get a turnover? Because I do think that you're going to have the opportunity with the pressure up front on Geno Smith. And like I said, he is going to put the ball in danger. You just got to be available and pick the football off. And hopefully it's not a penalty, on the play, which is something that the Commanders have had to clean up over the first 2 weeks is penalties. And so hopefully nothing gets called back here. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here, what do you think about these two final keys as we get ready to head into the game? Once again, just going back to the offensive side of the ball, I think it's going to be the ability to really go down the field for the Washington Commanders in the pass game, because just looking at the first 2 weeks, it just really hasn't been, I think, what this team has wanted to do, because in week 1, 6.4 per pass in week number 1, and just only 3.5 per pass in week number 2. And so that's just not going to get it done. I think for this Commanders team to really be efficient in the pass game and just kind of open up defenses, you need to be hitting and getting to at least 8, 9, maybe 10 yards per pass if you can. And so I know 10 is a little out there, but still, I definitely think 8 and 9 is somewhere where this team should be wanting to get to that range. I think it just makes them dangerous. I think it makes them more versatile. And so I think that this is the game where you try to open things up. And then, defensively, again, just going to that last point, the Commanders have to get turnovers. I think that that is going to be huge, because now, this is where, you, as much as we talk about the offense and everything else, like they need to generate points. I get all that. Your defense, it travels. Like, you need your defense. And so if you can go ahead and just set the tone early for a defense that can get turnovers and things like that, that's huge, because, that could be the possession that you need that, just swings the momentum your way when you're trying to make a deep postseason run, or you're trying to win, a postseason game or whatnot. And then, again, when it comes down to just like the Super Bowl, I think that that is going to be huge, because, you talk about the offenses and things like that, but it's the defense and its ability to dominate. I think that that's what we saw in last year's Super Bowl with the Eagles versus the Chiefs. it was the defense that really, I think, was the storyline of that game. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here what you guys are thinking about those two keys. And look, as we always say, go Commanders, and we'll be talking post game here tomorrow. All right, peace.